I'm Sherry Braithwaite. I am a certified mentor and a facilitator for a singles group, private singles group on Facebook, Thriving Singles Community. I created a Create Your Life Story ebook and Life Story Shared podcast. So from that, I want you to embrace your life stories, and I want you to heal from your past experiences and from just live the life that to your fullest, and also create a future that you love. So I created this interactive ebook. It provides links and resources to connect with experts in various topics. So it's more than just an ebook. It's more than prompts to help you write your life story. It's kind of a companion for you, like a life coach. It has all the interactive stuff that goes with it. And it's getting bigger every day. I just keep getting more ideas, and I have coaches that are helping me make it. So Create Your Life Story ebook for the Life Stories Shared. You first create your story, and then you get out there and share it. It's kind of just, that's really how the process goes. It's just learning from people's stories. In the podcast, I want to interview people. I'm doing that every Tuesday. I'll be doing that. And hear, what are your life experiences? What can you learn, or have you learned? And what can we learn from your life experiences? And just kind of help each other, support each other in our journeys. So tonight we have Mr. David Petermann. He is a college adjunct for Brigham Young University, Idaho. He is a licensed attorney. He's been licensed for 24 years. Okay, now here's the list. It's a whole page, you guys. I was so excited when I signed up for his class. You don't get to see the bios before you sign up with your professors, your teachers. You just pick ones that work with your schedule, and then sometimes you're lucky. So I was really excited to see. I'm going to be learning from this man this is all his experience that he's had. He currently works as an assistant United States attorney, federal criminal prosecutor, serving as the lead strike force organized crime drug enforcement attorney for the U.S. Department of Justice. As a lead strike force attorney, he leads a team of 35 analysts and agents from the FBI, DEA, ATF, HSI, IRS, U.S. Marshal Services, and the U.S. Postal Inspector. The service to interrupt, dismantle, and destroy transnational criminal organizations involved in human, weapons, and drug trafficking, and all of the mayhem of wickedness associated with all of these organizations. So as you can tell, he is not doing this instructor job because he has time on his hands. He didn't just say one day, I think I need to get another part-time job. I'm a little bit bored in my life. I need to add something else. That he is not just wanting to be an advocate himself. He also wants to raise up advocates. He wants to train us. Had this on my mind for a week, that I just feel like we are God's army. And I feel like someone like Brother Petermann he's like at the front lines, and he's just guiding us all in God's army to combat all that is evil out there, and trying to strengthen our families. And I do feel like it's a war. It's a full-on war of emotions, right? War of our hearts, war of our spirits, war of things that not necessarily physical, even though there's some of that too. But it is definitely we're in God's army, and we're on war. And so the advocates are the ones that are going to be cheering us on and giving us the strength to combat all that we face. So Mr. Petermann has been married for 30 years to his wife, and they have 2 children. He enjoys the outdoors. He lives I don't want to say where you live in case someone's spying on you. He has 27 years experience advocating for children and families as a special assistant for a U.S. congressman, immigration attorney, family law practitioner, and federal prosecutor combating human trafficking and exploitation of children crimes across the globe. He has worked in 5 of the 7 continents. Have you visited the other 2?
No.
What are the other 2 that you have not visited?
Antarctica and Australia.
Okay, so you need to make those on your bucket list, right? I don't know, maybe not. No, you don't need to. Anyway, that's what I'd be doing. I'd be like, I want to get them all. So I have been, he said, I have been teaching as an adjunct for 23 years at colleges and universities in a number of subjects. And then he just loves to share. He wants us to have an increased testimony of Jesus Christ and enhanced recognition of our abilities so that we can be outspoken in our advocacy efforts. And so far, I've only been in your class for 6 weeks now. Today's week 7, or this week is week 7. And I have learned so much. And mostly what I've learned is that I still have so much to learn. Like the more I learn, the more I realize I don't know. So it's like I'm like drinking out of a fire hose, but I love it. So I'm excited. Now I'm going to turn all the time over to you, Mr. Peterman, for just to describe anything that you want to tell us about your life story as much as you feel. I don't know if you have something planned, but we'll have questions, I'm sure.
Sure. And Sherry, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to do this. Since you asked me to do it, I think it was a couple of weeks ago, maybe it was only a week ago. I've had some time for quiet reflection, and really the biggest thing about being an advocate, and what I've told my students and what I tell people that I talk to, is we all advocate for something. We've all advocated for something. So all of us, as we sit wherever we are at life, advocate for something, for good or bad. We are speaking up and we're defending something. We have some values in our life that we live by, a code, a standard, and so we're advocating. So really, I see my role as an adjunct professor. I see my role as a federal prosecutor, as a father, as a citizen, is to advocate for the very best for society as a whole, and then we all benefit. And that's been kind of my approach. It's how I was raised by my single mother. I was raised for the very first. I was born in Massachusetts. I don't mind telling you that. I don't sound like I was born in Massachusetts, but I was primarily raised in Oklahoma, grades kindergarten through senior year. And I attended the University of Oklahoma before serving a full-time mission for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And I served that mission and again, you pay for the mission. You don't get to pick where you serve, but you just have to have a willing heart and a willingness to go and share the gospel of Jesus Christ and help other people. And I had that opportunity to do that in Wyoming, Idaho, and northern Utah.
Oh, wow.
And for a boy from Oklahoma who was a convert to the church, was raised Methodist, it was a unique experience for me. It was a very foreign mission for someone like myself. And so, but those first 11 years, I was raised by my mother, strictly, my younger brother and I, and then she finally met the man of her dreams, married him, and he eventually adopted me. They had twins, and one of them died shortly after birth. And so at a young age, we had to deal with the death of a sibling and what that's like. And, my sister, who's now an adult, all 3 children are adults, we've dealt with, the fact that we all have different fathers, but we have the same mother. And so, but we're half brothers and sisters by blood, right? But we've never seen it that way. It's never been that way. In fact, my dad, Mr. Peterman, he was adopted. His mother was not a very good parent, and he was adopted by the Petermans, who weren't very good parents either. They kind of, in West Townsend, Vermont, there's a Petermann country store, and Mrs. Petermann was the postmistress there, and they worked my Uncle Danny and my dad like slaves, really, and they kept running away. And the sheriff got tired of picking them up. So eventually he took them into his home, the sheriff's home.
Wow.
And he became one of 17 foster children. My grandma and grandpa McBride. And so he was very accustomed to living with people that treated as family, but they functioned as family. They weren't blood relationship. It was this fictive kinship that was kind of happening. And so that's really my background. That's kind of the story and the fabric in which I was raised. It took my mother 3 times to find the right person. She was divorced twice before she met my dad. And when I say my dad, I'm referring to Mr. Peterman, because I didn't know my biological father. And there's some difficulties of not knowing that. I know I was named after him. So, he was Big Dave. He was a little taller than I am, but in terms of medical history, I don't know that. And so, everything's kind of a surprise, so, and it's funny that people will look at my dad, Mr. Peterman, and I go, "Oh, you look just like your dad." Well, my dad has no hair. So I'm not sure how that is.
Oh.
My dad looks like a very older Sean Connery. Sean Connery and my dad look very similar to each other. So, which is kind of neat in a way. But my dad didn't have hair early on when Mr. Connery did. But in any event, one of the things that I tell people that about this is it took my mom 3 times to find the right person. And the good news is that, most first marriages in this country still succeed. They go to the natural course. And I tell people all the time that there are good divorces. There absolutely are. And it's an essential part of kind of our society. If we get into a bad arrangement, there needs to be an honorable way to get out. And there is. Second and third marriages fail at a higher rate, largely because people know what to expect and they see the signs. And if things aren't doing well, they're going to bail on that relationship too. And so you have a overall divorce rate over 50%, but it's really because second and third marriages fail at a higher rate. Now, that's not to discourage singles from not seeking it out, because even if you've been divorced, the large majority of divorced people still consider marriage as a goal, as an option, and sharing their life with somebody is still very important. And so it's still close to 90%, even on someone who's divorced. Most Americans want to be married. So it's still an institution that's looked upon favorably. And since 2014, the institution has been opened up to a lot more options other than one man and one girl. It's now more options. And so it's out there, and there's a lot of reasons for that. We could spend a whole day talking about that, but we won't. We won't. So I'm born in Massachusetts. I'm raised in Oklahoma. After high school graduation, I go to the University of Oklahoma. I then go on my mission, and to serve. Prior to going on my mission, my dad doesn't share the same faith as my mother and I, and so although supportive, he was raised Roman Catholic, and so that's also that's a reason why sometimes couples don't stick out, is because different faiths, when family get involved. But that wasn't my problem for my dad. My dad knew what my mother's faith was and knew that the kids were going to be raised in that faith. He even allowed his daughter to be raised in that faith. And so very supportive throughout that experience. He just wasn't going to pay for my mission. That's something I wanted to do, then I needed to do that. And so I was able to secure a job at a coal mine. And I worked in a coal mine for almost a year, saving up for my mission. And then I went on my mission for 2 years. And when I came back, I enrolled into Brigham Young University in Provo, Utah, and I got my degree in political science. Now, if you get a degree in political science, that is almost a guarantee that you're going to have to go to graduate school or learn a trade in order to support your family. It's kind of one of those degrees that sounds really cool on paper, sounds really exciting. It's like anthropology, and you're like, this is fun, learning about people and societies and how they all put together. And what am I going to do with this? And so that's always something I tell students is, on average, when I was going to college, you change your major 2.5 times, right? I don't know if I haven't looked really to know whether or not 30 years later, if that's any different than it was when I was going to school. But I come from a long line of folks that are non-traditional students. My wife, bless her heart, I met her when I was at Brigham Young University. We got married while I was still an undergrad, and we've been married now for 30 years. This is our 30th anniversary this year. And we have 3 children, ages 26. He was born after our first year of law school. We didn't wait till we had a degree to start having children.
Okay, thank you. So 3 children. I said 2, probably just the 2 that are living with. Is that what I said?
Yes, there's 2 living with me. Right.
That's okay.
Yes. No worries. No worries. No. Josh is he's a first lieutenant in the United States Army. He's fluent in the Chinese language. He served his mission in Taiwan and then studied Chinese at BYU. And the U.S. Army, in all their wisdom, put him in the middle of Kansas. So that's where he is right now. But he's loving his job, and he hopes to use some of that Chinese language eventually, maybe working with his dad someday. So we'll wait and see how that happens. So there I am in undergrad, and I looking for opportunities. I'm in the political world, and I thought, well, maybe I could work for a politician. And so one day I just picked up the phone and I started calling political offices, U.S. congressmen and senators' offices, saying, hey, is there a volunteer option? Is there something I could do? And lo and behold, I called the U.S. Congressman's office, Congressman William Orton from the Utah's 3rd Congressional District at the time. It's the seat that Jason Chaffetz eventually joined or got, if anyone's familiar with him. And so I was hired as an intern, and it was an unpaid position initially. But after working there 6 months, the congressman hired me, and I worked part-time there until I graduated. And then he hired me full-time as a special assistant. And as his special assistant, I was responsible for a number of different programs, and one of them were crimes against children, which was and women, really domestic violence, and steering issues towards him to contemplate and consider in terms of legislation and the constituency that he served, the 560,000 people at the time that he was responsible for and represented in Congress. And so that was really my first glimpse. I also had Indian country, and so I'm looking at the dynamics there of families and how they work together, and really the systemic problem that we have with domestic violence in this country and really worldwide. Because if you look at the grand total of domestic violence and where it's at, one of the things I learned very quickly is, the United States is number one in a lot of things, but one of the things mercifully we're not number one in is really domestic violence. That's not where we're number one. We're high up there in terms of English speaking countries. We might be number one there, but South Africa is the most dangerous place to be a woman, unfortunately. Brazil comes second, Russia, Mexico is the first North American country on that list. Rounding off the top five, it's Iran, and then you have India kind of hitting up that top 10. The United States falls number 19th in the world in terms of the rate of domestic violence against women. Now, not that men don't have or are not victims of domestic violence, they certainly are, but the vast majority of domestic violence victims, some 91%, are in fact women. So it is a women's issue. It's obviously a child's issue, because obviously if domestic violence is involved, there are children present, they're collateral damage. I mean, they're experiencing that world, that hurt, they're seeing it. And being raised by a single mother, one of the things I remember, even as a 7, 8, 9-year, 10-year-old, my mother would sometimes share things with me that probably you shouldn't be sharing with 7, 8, or 9. She's a young woman. She had me when she was 19. So she's a young mother. She's single. She's working several jobs. In fact, she's cleaning up. She's the manager of the apartment complex we lived in, and she's cleaning the apartment of a young soldier, Mr. Petermann, and that's how they met. And so he married his maid, who was also his apartment manager, complex manager. And so, any event, she's working very hard to get things done, to try to support her family. And it's a tough thing. It's a tough thing when you look at the dynamic of not having a father around. And so there are a lot of things shared with me that, in retrospect, I know she said, maybe I shouldn't have shared that with you, but you were kind of the only guy. And we went to church together. And so having, someone as a male example, I was it. And as short as that might be, that was me. And so that's kind of my upbringing. And then when Dad came, it took me a little longer to adjust to having someone else around. Suddenly this guy shows up. I don't know who he is. He says he wants to be my dad, and I'm a little unsure about things, but it worked out very well for me. So I'm not complaining whatsoever. But one of the things I think that's important that I learned as I begin seeing how the congressman represents the interests of women and children in his district, as I'm looking at the propensity of domestic violence and really how difficult it can be. 1 in 5 women in this country will be victims of domestic violence. It's the sad state of affairs in your lifetime. 1 in 5 women, that's 20%. It varies a little bit, somewhere between 20 and 23%, but the latest studies are 1 in 5. And that's just too high. It's not acceptable. I'm not going to tell you what it's like in places like, well, I will tell you what's like in South Africa. It's almost 1 in 2.
Wow.
It's just devastating how dangerous it is to be a woman in some places in this country. And one of the things I tell people all the time, and I was with the congressman for almost 2 years, and then I decided that the only way to really go upward mobility is once you're in Congress's office is to be the congressman. And so I decided I was going to go to law school. And I grew up as a latchkey child, which was basically come home. My mom's working one of her several jobs. She's not there. And so I'm taking care of my little brother. And this is before she obviously met Mr. Petermann and got married. But there I am. There we are. And so I'm watching after television shows. And one of them was Perry Mason. And I always felt sorry for the poor prosecutor that went up against Perry Mason all the time, because he always lost. Mr. Berger was his name. And so in my mind, Perry Mason's real. I'm 7, 8, 9 years old, so forgive me. And so in my mind, when I had goals, when teachers would ask me, what do you want to do? I want to grow up. I want to be Perry Mason. You want to be Perry Mason? No, I want to beat Perry Mason. I'm going to be prosecutor. That's who I'm going to be. So it took me a while. I won't tell you how old I was when I realized, well, he's not really an attorney. He was an actor playing an attorney. But in any event, it was a good motivation for me. And so I went to law school. And one of the reasons why I chose the law school I did is because I had a night program. And one of the reasons I picked a night program is because I didn't want to wait long to start a family. I wanted to start having a family just as soon as we possibly could. And so I went to the University of Toledo. And initially, I was going to work for the congresswoman there because I was already a full-time employee of a congressman who was a Democrat. And I'm not a Democrat. I'm a registered Republican, but I proudly and gladly worked for a Democrat. And here's the other thing I think we have lost sight of in this country, and for anyone to effectively advocate to make systemic changes that are going to impact broad swaths of society, you have got to be able to work with people that don't necessarily see your point of view on every facet of the world. And that's okay. You're not surrendering or compromising your goals or your values, but discourse in the public arena needs to be civil. And the problem that we have right now, this is me speaking. I'm not speaking on behalf of the United States government. I'm not speaking on behalf of Brigham Young University or the University of Central Oklahoma. I'm not speaking on behalf of anybody else other than David Petermann. And what I'm telling you is there needs to be a whole lot more movement to the middle of things. That if we were willing to just legislate and make changes on the things we agreed upon, even if that sliver is just 15 to 20%, we could get things done that would help the whole. The problem is we're legislating as a country from extremes, and we're getting nothing back. It's all about, I'm going to get you when it's my turn. I'm going to get you when it's my turn. And nobody benefits. No. And the silly thing is we keep putting the same people in power. Keep putting the same kinds of people in power. And we expect a different result. I mean, someone wants to find insanity as doing the same thing over and over again and expecting to get a different result. And so our politics are a little they're not effective. And we need to be more effective. I think at the local level, there's a little bit more of that. It really depends where you're at. And I think transparency in the voting systems just needs to be more there. I think this last presidential election, there were a number of Americans who felt like they were robbed or cheated. There was just no evidence to support that. There wasn't. Now, was that because the evidence was destroyed? Was that because the evidence wasn't there? Was that because, I mean, there could be a number of reasons, but it didn't do anybody any good, those that won or those that lost, when you couldn't look at things, when you couldn't question, and then suddenly you're called a traitor. Again, that's harsh rhetoric, and it's not effective. It doesn't help. And I think we just need to be more Christ-like in our approach. Yes. I grew up in rural Oklahoma, and what would Jesus do was a barometer that many of my friends used. It's not a Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints statement, but it is our philosophy and belief, as most Christians believe, is we try to emulate Jesus. There is no better advocate than Jesus. That is his role and function in the universe, to be our advocate for mercy through his grace and his sacrifice through the atonement to our Father in heaven, who represents justice in this world. And so he's the example to follow, right? Yes. No question about it. And so here I am. I'm going to law school and not going to work with the congresswoman there, even though she's a great lady. I actually get a job with a judge as a clerk, a criminal clerk. And so I spend the last 3 years, normally it takes 3 years to get your law degree. It took me 3.5 because I went to law school at night and I worked full-time during the day. And I worked as a clerk for a judge doing his criminal work. And I sat in the courtroom and I watched hundreds of trials and I was the bailiff for the juries. And it was a great experience. Really, my law school experience in many ways was in that courtroom with Judge J. Ronald Bowman, who was a retired 2-star general who had served in the Korean War. Very stern man, not a very forgiving man, but a great teacher and very generous with his time. And I learned a lot from him, and I have a lot to be thankful and grateful for him. And so because of him, when I graduated from law school, I was hired immediately by the prosecutor's office and started doing into the felony department and doing my own investigations of my own felonies. And one of the things that Ohio did that I found incredibly helpful is they had what's called truth in sentencing, meaning if you got 2-year sentence from a judge, you're going to do 2 years, except you could get good time credit, which was 1 day for every good month you had. So if you had a 2-year sentence, you might get 24 days off. Now you're thinking, well, 24 days off, that's nothing. Well, if if you're 23 months and 2 weeks in,
Yeah.
and you could get off 2 weeks early, that's going to become important at some point, right? If you get a 10-year sentence, you're only going to get 120 days, right? Or no, 120 days off. That's only 3 months off. But again, it becomes important when you hit that 9-year, 9-month,
Good
right?
to
You
be
get to go
good,
home, right?
behave.
Right. So Ohio had that. And the other thing that they had was, I mean, it's still a problem today. There are a lot of single women who aren't getting support from the fathers of their children. And so Ohio's state legislature came up with this law called non-supportive dependence, which basically meant that in 104-month period, which is 2 years, if there were 40 weeks of consecutive non-payment, you were guilty of a felony and you could be
Wow.
prosecuted. In my office, led by a very aggressive Democrat prosecutor, there I am working for a Democrat again. What's that Republican doing? Just trying to make a difference in the world that I'm in, and that's okay. Whatever community you find, don't let the R, the D, or the I, or the L next to your name limit you. You have a voice, use it, right? You have hands and arms and legs, use it. Be a good citizen, and that's about working on common ground, building on common ground. I happen to believe that deadbeat dads ought to be paying for their children, and so I got involved in some of those prosecutions. I got to see the impact that my office had on some of those prosecutions. And really it came down, a lot of people would say in defense, well, if you put me in jail, I can't support my family. And so you haven't been supporting your family for over 40 weeks. And so what would happen more often than not, the judges would say, all right, tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to give you 6 months. I'm going to continue your sentencing. I'm going to give you 6 months. See if you get a job and see if you start paying down those arrears. In fact, I want to see 10% of the arrears, the money you haven't paid all this time, paid off. And then we'll have your sentencing then. And it was a very effective tool.
Yeah.
I have to say that more than not, those deadbeat dads came up with some money, right? They got jobs, sometimes two.
Yeah.
I don't want to work at McDonald's. I don't want to work at Walmart stocking shelves. Well, then what you're telling me is you want to go to prison. And that's exactly where you're going to go. Because if you're not going to pay the kids, I'm not going to have you out wandering the streets free and perhaps creating another baby that you're not going to support or pay for. So I liked what Ohio had to do. I thought it sent a good, positive family kind of image out there. And it was trying to right a wrong, trying to correct a system. The problem, I think, with a lot of governments have is just trying to devote those resources to those types of prosecutions because they are time and labor intensive. They do require support from, Health and Human Services. They require support from the local state agencies with more than not want to help and get the women the money they need to support their children. So I saw early on in my prosecutor career kind of that way. Now, keep in mind, when I became a state prosecutor, I think my starting salary was $36,000 a year. And that wasn't close to what my student loans were. And so I left the prosecutor's office after a couple of years and went to a private practice. I went to a private law firm, which largely did toxic tort defense for a Fortune 500 company, but I also ended up doing some insurance defense. I was allowed to do criminal defense work where I was a prosecutor before, but now I was defending people charged with crimes. And so I got to see the other side of the criminal justice system and got to be involved in that. It was a very positive experience for me. I represented some 13, maybe 14 people during that time and had a successful trial and got somebody, the jury found him not guilty. So I had one trial as a criminal defense attorney and we were successful. So I'm 100% as a criminal defense. So, but it was against my old office. And a week after that trial, I got a phone call from my boss asking if I'd come back. I said, well, you know what I'm making? I'm making a whole lot more in the private world. And he goes, I'll pay you what you're making now if you come back.
Nice.
I gave my 2-week notice and then I went back because I love the courtroom. And so I was able to make that move, make that change. And then maybe a year and a half later, I got my first offers to be a federal prosecutor. But again, just and this is the message I told my children, I tell friends, anyone who'll listen. To be a federal prosecutor, it's the they're the highest paid prosecutors in the land. Great. But you're representing the United States and being able to walk in and say, the state of Ohio, present, that was wonderful. Say, David Petermann for the United States, that means something, right? I swear an allegiance like millions of other folks in various jobs, not only to their state constitutions, but also to the national constitution, right? Not to the Republican Party, not to the conservatives in the world, not to Christians. I swear allegiance to the Constitution, which gives freedoms to all.
Yeah.
those inalienable rights, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, which we know from the founding fathers was initially the acquisition of property, right? So, and then the maintenance and the protection of that property, of that life, of that chance to be better than the generation before. That's the American dream that we all hope for, right, for our children, and it should still exist. And I think it still does. And what you'll find in the next few minutes as I'm talking to you is I'm an eternal optimist. I work with the very best men and women working against the very worst men and women. And so there's a dichotomy that I have the opportunity to see every day. The most evil and repulsive things you can possibly imagine have to be dealt with and confronted head on.
Mm-hmm.
Notwithstanding that, there's still due process for these folks. They're still considered innocent until proven guilty. I've had 78 jury trials in my career as a lawyer. One of them was as a defense attorney. I've had thousands of evidentiary hearings. I've been part of thousands of sentencings of individuals who have committed crimes and are held accountable by man. Their accountability to God is outside my realm. It's above my pay grade. I'm not the final judge, and neither is any judge in this world. The final judge is God the Father. And I think that's helpful to remember. And one of the things that I think have made me an effective advocate in the criminal justice system is that I recognize that we're all children of God, and that God loves all of his children. May not be happy with all the children all the time. And if you have multiple children or even a single child, you're not always happy with the choices they make, but you still love them. And I think that helps that relationship. I have found many times I'm on my knees praying and asking for guidance because I'm not sure exactly what I'm going to say at sentencing. There's this balance here, and I've got to work within the parameters that I have. I've got to work within the parameters of my conscience and try to come up with the right thing and do the right thing. And that's really my mantra. It's about doing the right thing to the right people at the right time for the right reasons. And if you can't do that, then you need to look for something else to do, because you're not where you need to be. You're not where you're comfortable. And not that you can't be in places where you're uncomfortable, but you have to at least operate on that just basic foundation. Because if you are, then here's a person, a man or a woman, that's just always trying to do their best. And it's going to fail, it's going to fall short, but they're going to learn from their mistakes. They're going to try again the next day. If you get up one more time than you knock down, you win in this life. You win in this life. And that's the thing to remember. In relationships, in love, in family dynamics, in the professional world. And I'm also a true advocate and believer in that anything you can do outside the home, and those members of my faith will recognize this, doesn't really matter if you're failing inside your home. And failing in the home doesn't mean that you have troubles. Failing in the home doesn't mean that the marriage didn't work. It takes two people working incredibly hard to make any relationship work, whether that's parent-child or whether that's spouses. And one person can wreck that up. And two people can too. I mean, I'm not saying it's always one person's fault. And there's a number of reasons why marriages end. And a lot of people want to say, the number one reason is it's infidelity, that he or she cheated on me. And that's not really always the number one reason. It's one of the top 4 reasons for divorce in this country. But the number one reason is lack of commitment. You're not committed to the other person. And there's 100 ways to see whether you're committed or not. It's not about you. The relationship isn't about you. We love egalitarian relationships. We love egalitarian marriages where people can get together and negotiate their roles. And there's nothing wrong with that. Historically, it was always a patriarchal, right? The man was the breadwinner. He had all the responsibility for providing. We're past that. We've been long past that for a long time. Our economy doesn't allow us that privilege, or at least allows that privilege for very few of us, right? There are multiple breadwinners. Sometimes the children are even involved in the process. And so we got to look at that. But, lack of commitment is the number one reason why they're just not committed to each other, not willing to sacrifice your wants, your needs, your personal, growth for the other person. And that sacrifice needs to be there. Infidelity, extramarital affairs is number 2. It's there, but it's not number 1. Number 3, very close, is too much conflict, incessant arguing. You don't resolve conflict well. Having the last word, you have to be, or you have to be the loudest. That's really not how arguments are won. Arguments really are won through reason and listening. The hardest thing to do in communication is to listen. And so too much conflict, incessant argument is the third. And then finally, the fourth one is really just lack of emotional intimacy, which also leads to lack of physical intimacy. The emotional connection is gone. You've allowed it to grow cold, or it wasn't really there in the first place. Sometimes we make mistakes in choosing our mate. Sometimes we want to rescue. You should never go into a relationship thinking, I'm going to fix him or her, and then they're going to be happy and we'll be happy. That is a recipe for disaster. It almost never works. And so I tell people all the time, if you think you're going to rescue, that is not a reason to go into that relationship. Now, if you go into that relationship knowing I'm not going to rescue him or her, and I just want to be with them, then that's your choice, and you're going in with those expectations. And don't be surprised by the result you might have, and maybe it works. I mean, sometimes it does work. A lot of people ask, well, should we stay married because of the children? We have children, and children always complicate things. Not in a bad way. Complications aren't necessarily a negative. Complications can be a very positive, because an idle mind is what the devil's tool shop or workshop, right? So if you're always busy, always working out the complexities of family life, you're not doing you're engaged in an honorable thing, right? Trying to make the family work it's a good thing, especially if you have commitment from a spouse. But again, I benefited from a single mother who just wouldn't quit. There's no quit in her. I also benefited from a single mother who didn't know a stranger. She was very giving of herself to the day she died. She created this group called the Sunshine Sisters. I'm just going to brag on my mom a little bit. I lost her to COVID about 1.5 years ago, and it's hard. You know, I was a mama's boy. She was all I had for the first 11 years of my life, and so it's been tough without her. Knowing that I'll be with her again someday is helpful. But there are days when I just want to pick up the phone and go, "Hey, and I just don't have that opportunity right now." And so, you know, you feel that, right? But one of the things she always told me, that families are forever. And I truly believe that. And I think that makes all the sacrifice, all the effort, all that much more worth it. So there I am. I get this job as a federal prosecutor, and I initially start in Tucson, Arizona. And then after 4 years, my parents both had, believe it or not, within 1 year of each other, they had open heart surgery. And so I went to Oklahoma, got into the Western District of Oklahoma, the Oklahoma City office for the U.S. attorneys. There are 94 U.S. attorneys in the world, right? 94 federal districts. I've worked for the Western District of Oklahoma, and I worked for the District of Arizona. And then in 2021, I returned to the District of Arizona, where I work out of presently. But while I was a federal prosecutor, I got involved in some very interesting investigations and prosecutions with members of some wonderful federal agencies that were responsible for protecting women and especially children. One of the things that's out there is there's a lot of reasons why you can't constitutionally own a gun. And many people may not be aware of this, but one of the reasons why you can't constitutionally own a gun, even though the Supreme Court has recognized that it is an individual right to possess a firearm, you forfeit that right if you're a convicted felon, right? You forfeit that right if you are an illegal alien with no lawful right to be present in the United States. You forfeit that right if you are an AWOL from the U.S. military. You forfeit that right if you've denounced your citizenship and moved to Switzerland. You forfeit that right if you have a misdemeanor domestic violence conviction.
Wow. That's good. That's a good law. But
it's a good thing. It's a good thing. It actually helps. And so that's one of the things I think that Congress has done when they were working together to get things done that are helpful to the families. The other thing that they did is they created, and I wish they didn't have to do it, but they recognized that there was a problem. There was a problem with men and women from affluent countries going to countries that weren't affluent and victimizing children in a very bad way. And what it does is it creates a demand for human trafficking organizations. What it does is it creates a demand for kidnapping and seizing of individuals and putting them into the slave trades. And so the U.S. Congress created a law that basically said that any U.S. citizen who went to a foreign country and hurt another child could be prosecuted in the United States for that hurt. And the penalties range from 20 years to life.
Yes.
So I got involved in
Yeah.
some of those prosecutions.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I did, and Sherry, you want to say something?
No, I said lock them up.
Well, yes. And again, the very worst of us are entitled, and that's what makes the United States criminal justice system so good, is you can be accused of the most heinous crime, but you're going to get your day in court. There are some places where that's not going to happen.
Yes, it's true.
That's not going to happen. And so one of the things, and do we have problems, right? Does it look like we have a two-tiered system of justice, the rich and then the poor, the haves and the have-nots? Sometimes it can look that way. And looking inside to out, I can see why people see that sometimes.
Yeah.
But as an insider in this system, it still works. As an insider in this system, there's still justice.
That's good to know. I was going to ask you that because sometimes we do feel like, is the federal government really on our side? Really, like sometimes we wonder.
And let me tell you why I can say that, because it's decentralized to a degree. There are 94 different federal districts in the country, and they're all responsive to their own district courts. So there are these federal judges who have lifetime appointment, and they shouldn't be beholden to anybody because no one's going to take them out of office unless they are impeachable, right? Mm-hmm. And so these men and women should then be neutral arbitrators of the law with no special interest, you would think. Now, maybe there are exceptions to that, but by and large, whether you're a D, an R, an I, an L, doesn't matter politically. By and large, most judges are trying to do the right thing. You may not agree that what they think the right thing is your right thing, and that's fine. That's how it works, right? There's checks and balances. We are a republic of hundreds of millions of people. We're not all going to agree. We're not all going to see it the right way, and that's okay. Just build on common ground. Build on the things we do. We all recognize that we do not want U.S. citizens going across the world and hurting children. One of the cases I got involved very early on in this, and I was the international coordinator at the time. I was a young missionary from Oklahoma who traveled to Africa and raped 11 Kenyan orphans over the course of 33 days. And one of the opportunities I had to do is I got to go over to Kenya with interpreters and the FBI and try to negotiate with the Kenyan government for an opportunity to bring these victims, and that's what they were, victims, ranging in ages 4 to 15, boys and girls. Horrible thing that happened. Mm-hmm. And this particular defendant came from what appeared to be a loving family. His father was way high in the local fire department. His grandfather was a judge. His brother was a collegiate wrestler. His mother taught at a Christian school. You know, he was upper middle class. His yearbook, he went to the same high school as my son. He was a little older, but his yearbook, he was voted most likely to change the world. I use that phrase in the closing argument. He was most likely to change the world. He did change the world. He changed the world for 11 young African children and those that loved him. Changed it forever. Mm-hmm. In fact, his impact on the Kenyan government made it more difficult for foreigners to adopt Kenyan children. In fact, the Kenyan government wasn't going to let the children come over initially because they felt like if the kids came over, that American families would want to adopt them. And that's exactly true. They did. We had people lined up and said, oh, when they come, we'll take them. We'll take them. And we had to make that arrangement that no, all the kids were coming back to Kenya. And so it was a difficult experience. It was an eye-opening experience. The community opened up and loved these children. A lot of people, it split the community because the church community that supported this missionary that did all these terrible things, they're torn. They think that, it's a setup. And then the sponsor of the mission effort was from another school in the local community or another church in the local community. So you have these two church communities kind of dividing this town of 80,000 people back and forth. Oh, he did it. He didn't do it. He didn't do it. At the end of the day, those children testified in front of 12 men and women of a jury. The public's not allowed to see juveniles when they take the stand. Yeah. So the only one allowed to see was the defendant and his defense team, the prosecutors, the jury, and the judge. That's it. They testified. Those victims testified. And the jury believed the victims. And they convicted that man, and he's now doing 40 years in prison. So I was involved in that process early on. I was involved in another case involving lawyers and bail bondsmen and retired military who traveled to Peru and were having sex with underage children. And I got involved in traveling to that country and working with that government and doing an enforcement action that led to the arrest of those Americans and their eventual conviction of these young jungle girls near Iquitos, Peru, who were just exploited by rich, wealthy Westerners, unfortunately, majority of them are Westerners, and for sex. And you know, a lot of people say it's child prostitution. It's not. Children aren't prostitutes.
Yeah.
Just want know that first and foremost. They're victims.
Yes.
Anyone forced to sell themselves or runs away and sells themselves for sex, commercial sexual act, they're not prostitutes if they're children. They're victims.
Yeah.
Child can't consent, period. And so it's a victim of circumstance, a victim of oppression, human trafficking, whatever it might be. But just know that they're not. There are some judges, unfortunately, that are in the belief that, you know, if someone comes on and says, "Hey, I'm 18," and they're not necessarily 18. Here's the other thing that Congress did that's good. Congress created a law that basically said that if a purchaser of sex has a reasonable opportunity to observe the person they're buying sex from or sex for, then it doesn't matter whether they believe that person was 24, 34, or 44. One particular case that comes to mind, I don't know if I told you this, but that group of men that were in Peru and also traveled to Thailand, and I had victims in Thailand and in Mexico. And so there were a number of places. They're now doing 14 years in prison, each of them. Had difficulty getting some of the witnesses to come and testify. I had one brave girl come and testify. And she just happened to be of my faith, and that was a good experience to see her turning her life around and doing a positive thing, and really speaking on behalf of a lot of victims that weren't willing or able to do what she was willing to do. And so brave people coming forward and being exploited and facing that cross-examination, which again is a hallmark of the criminal justice system we have. You know, you're innocent till proven guilty, even though that we have plenty of probable cause to believe you did the crime. That's why we arrested you for the crime. But a jury at the end of the day is still going to make that decision, jury of your peers. And that's what actually, none of those men went to trial. The missionary in Africa, he went to trial. Those men were caught red-handed, and they were afraid of the testimony of that young girl who came up from Peru because of what she did and just how effective her testimony and truthful her testimony and compelling her testimony was. And so she did a great thing. One of the things that, as I mentioned before, that Congress has done to allow federal prosecutors to have this reach across anywhere in the world and to defend the world's children is this idea that, you know, they can't. I didn't know she was a minor. I mean, and let's be honest, there are 17, 16, 15, 12-year-olds that look like they're older than some adults that you know.
That's true.
And so it used to be a defense until it wasn't. And the reason it's not a defense, now here's a defense. If you are blind, cannot hear a voice, cannot see a person, and you participate in a commercial sex act and the person, you don't have a reasonable opportunity to observe that person. But short of that, darkened room doesn't matter, you can turn a light on. If you have an opportunity to look at a person and you're not sure, then you shouldn't be doing it. Right? Now, commercial sex act is wrong regardless. It's a crime. But whether it's a misdemeanor or a felony really depends upon whether your victim is a minor or they're voluntarily an adult engaged in the act of prostitution. Adults can make those volunteer choices about what they want to do with their life. Children can't. And Congress recognizes that and have created this good framework for which we can reach out and help. Now, so I was involved in those types of cases. And one of the things that we did that I'm quite proud of is we actually went after a customer, and that customer purchased sex, had a reasonable opportunity to observe. She was a runaway. And a lot of people caught up in sexual trafficking are runaways. In fact, 25% of all runaways in this country will be caught up in sex trafficking in this country. Missing persons, the vast majority of them are runaways, okay, for whatever reason. And only those that are abducted only 25% of those abducted in this country are abducted by strangers. So why it's good to talk to your kids about stranger danger, don't take candy from a stranger, don't risk that, don't do that. It doesn't fit in most circumstances.
Mm.
Most people, most strangers who abduct children are men. That shouldn't shock any of us. Most people who are abducted are teenage girls. That shouldn't shock us either. That age from 12 to 17, right?
Mm.
Teenagers, or 12 is typically preteen, but they kind of fall in that category as well. And so, it's, go ahead.
But what you're saying is that it likely could be from men they know and trust.
Absolutely. The vast majority of people they know. And it, not necessarily a family member, but it's somebody they know. It's the son of the neighbor down the road. It's the bus driver. It's it's the teacher at school. It's the father of one of their friends.
Who these traffickers are the people that are like finding kids and keeping them and selling them across the country. We hear about like, oh, you are like that kind of reporting stuff. Is that anyway, that's a danger for our children to like, that's
it absolutely is a danger. There's no, it is a real thing.
It is happening. How do you keep your kids safe? That's the thing. I didn't know.
There is a number of ways to keep your kids safe. One of the first reasons, and again, the first 48 hours matter in these crimes. One of the things that you should always do is you should have ID and photos, recent photos taken of your children at 6-month intervals. When you change the batteries, maybe some of you are going, I don't change the batteries in my fire smoke alarm, but maybe you should. A lot of people, I usually use it general conference for our church. When our church has its general conferences in April and October, I always change the batteries in my smoke alarms. It's also a good time to update the photographs of your children, because getting your image of a missing child out quickly and soon, and we have abilities to blast it over social media and the internet are huge. Having your kids fingerprinted, local sheriff's department in almost every county in this country will do that for either a small fee or free of charge. Keeping your medical and dental records for your kids, and I know that can be tough for a single mother that may not have benefits. But the other thing to do is you need to be a nosy parent. You need to be engaged. The number one job of parents is not to be the best friend of your child. Do not get caught up in that trap.
Yeah.
Your job, your responsibility is to be the very best parent you can be. And that means, you can do buddy things with your kids. You can be there for them, but being their best friend is kind of a disservice to them. Be the best mom or the best dad you can be for them. It's going to it's going to look the same, but the labeling really matters, because I think what it does is it, look, I love you, but I'm your dad, I'm your mom, and I need to see what you're looking at online. What's my phone? Well, you're not really technically paying for it. But it's for your own protection. And let's talk about some things. Here's some things I've seen you post that I think you need to be careful of. And let's talk about that. No. Parent can't be too careful about this. And might be that you take that away from them. Well, that's why they run away. Well, it's that balancing. It's that communication you got to have with your child. You have to be willing to go through some speed bumps and some tough things. But ultimately, so let that child know, I love and I care about you, and I want you to be safe. And it's, oh, mom, it's not going to happen to me. I am careful. Those are sometimes, sadly and tragically, famous last words in a relationship. So, we've got over 2,000 kids reported missing in this country every day.
Every day.
Every day. Now, the vast majority of them are just someplace where there was a miscommunication.
Friend's
house, or they've run away, right? They weren't abducted, they just run away. They run away to a friend's house or another relative's home. They just run away, right? So, but those that are truly abducted, having that kind of information that you can pass out and get to them, but set boundaries, supervise, don't, sometimes you get up and you walk around the house at night at 2 or 3 in the morning, check the windows. Those kinds of things. Caregivers for your kids. Make sure the people that you have watching your kids, that you're doing some due diligence with, you're checking on them. The babysitters. If you're having other people pick up your kids, make sure the school knows who they are, right? Don't put your names on your kids, especially small kids' clothes. Kids will be trusting if a stranger knows their name. And they'll look at the backpack that your kid's carrying, and they'll see Tony, and he's going to start saying, Tony, Tony.
Yes.
And immediately their guard's down.
Mhm.
Right? You need to confront that. You need to teach them. You need to educate your children, your teenage daughters. You know, they read, they write, they're National Honor Society, they're doing great, they're going to go to college. And sometimes we don't see the danger right in front of us. And so they need to have a parent or parents that are feeding them this. You need to be careful. I need you to be careful. The world out there is a dangerous place. Have them watch the news a little bit, right?
Yeah.
It's out there. You got to be careful with these kinds of things. And I just can't emphasize that enough. I might have mentioned this to you before, Sherry, but again, it's about this balance. If you have a motivated offender,
Yeah, let's do this.
and a suitable target,
Yeah.
you're going to have a crime. So you have to do things that aren't going to create situations where the offender is going to be motivated. If you're walking out to a parking lot to your car, your head needs to be on a swivel. Don't be talking on your phone with your head down walking. That's motivating somebody, and it's making you a suitable target. So you get both axes going against you. Okay? Don't park next to a van in a parking lot. I don't care how crowded the van is. I don't care if you're underneath a light. And if you find out when you come out of the place that you were visiting or buying things at, don't go to your car if it's next to a van. Get on the phone and talk to somebody. Have someone else walk with you. There's security in a lot of places. People will do that for you. Just don't take that risk. The other thing I have my wife, I insist on it. She didn't do this for the longest time, but she's now done it. You pay a few dollars more. Anymore, it's not that much more. So instead of $6, you're paying $10. But go to an automatic car wash to have your car washed, or wash it in your own driveway. But even be careful with that. Just think how focused you are when you're in there vacuuming, trying to get that Cheerio from that middle seat that your third son said he wasn't having Cheerios, but it's obvious from what you're seeing he is. You're so focused on that you're not seeing anyone come up from you. Or you're wiping down your car so there's no water spots on it afterwards. You're just not paying attention to your surroundings. Those car washes are, if you own one right now and I'm ruining your business, do something about it. I apologize. But more often than not, they're places for crime. They're a favorite place for drug transactions. And if you're going to play, and again, it's not necessarily in the bad neighborhoods, it's in all neighborhoods. So just be very careful. Or if you're going to wash your car at one of those places because you want to save $4 and you don't like the automated thing, then have someone there with you. And your job is just to stand outside. Guess what? That's a deterrent. So if you have a motivated offender and a suitable target, but you have deterrents, large dog, large husband, any husband, right? Kids, sometimes kids make you more vulnerable. So, little kids aren't helping you in that situation because a carjacking could easily take place. And maybe they're not going to hurt you individually, but they're going to take your car because you're not paying attention. And heaven forbid you're in the trunk area and the keys are still in the hundreds of cars get stolen that way, right out of the hands of people. So you want to be careful about that. Now, let me talk a little bit about fathers and the lack of fathers. For the first 11 years, I didn't have a father figure in my life. I was blessed and fortunate to have a wonderful father, still a great man today. I have a wonderful relationship with him. People say we look alike, we talk alike, we sound alike. The sound alike, because for, good heavens, for 40 years of my life, I've been listening to him.
Yes.
Right. And so I do, and I agree with most of what he has to say. Although we don't share the same religious beliefs, we certainly share a lot of political beliefs, Christian, conservative. And so that matters. Again, not having a dad means something. In 1964, Senator Patrick Moynihan, who later became Senator Patrick Moynihan, a Democrat, wrote an interesting paper as a professor at Columbia University entitled The American Black Family in Crisis, 1964. 59 years ago, almost 60 years ago. And the reason he wrote this paper is because there was a study done that showed a dismaying, uncomfortable situation, which was that neighborhoods or communities where 30% or more of the households were raised or headed by single parents experienced a terrible reduction in positive things and an equally terrible increase in negative outcome.
Mm.
And some of those outcomes involve this. In neighborhoods where 30% or more of families were raised by a single parent, 87% of which of those were women in 1964, that number holds true gender-wise today. About 87% of single households in this country are headed by women. But that
Wow.
tells you more than 10% are headed by men, right? So what Senator Moynihan has found, and what sociologists have discovered since then, in this almost 60 years, is that 30% figure in a community, any given community, rings true today. You're going to have an increase in juvenile delinquency. Why? Because the single parent has to wear the hats of two parents. The single parent, 75% of the time, has more than one child. And so if you have two children, two parents, you can go man to man, right? You can do that. You got 3 kids, 2 parents, you got to go zone defense, right? Right. But it's still manageable. You multiply the kids, it's still manageable, right? You have to change the scheme a little bit, right? Sometimes you recruit the older kids to help you with the younger ones, but it still works, right? But if it's a single parent, they're overwhelmed, and they're trying to do all things, and it's incredibly hard for any individual to do that. Hats off to the single moms out there. I had one, incredibly fortunate that she was able to hold it together like she is. And some days it feels like you're not holding it together, but those are the days probably where you're doing your best work and you just don't see it, right?
Yes.
You just don't see it. So you have this increase in delinquency, which are basically kids don't commit crimes per se, but they do things that aren't good, right? Vandalizing, curfew violation, trespass, breaking windows, throwing things, just unsupervised things, kids get into trouble. 35 to 40% increase in delinquency in those communities. You're going to have a 45 to 50% increase in crime in those communities. Why? Because you have lots of suitable targets. You don't have many deterrents because the mother's occupied, either out working or somewhere else with the kids. And there's just not a lot of deterrents. And so motivated offenders, suitable targets. So you have an increase in crime. You have a decrease in property values because people aren't taking care of the lawn. People aren't taking care of the house. They don't have time, or they don't have the resources for it. You have a decrease in academic outcome in the local schools, which usually means a decrease in enrollment because people are going to better schools and leaving it, which usually means a decrease in the quality of instruction that's happening. You see there how this precipitous downhill thing's happening. And so you have all these factors that are creating an impact on these communities. That was in 1964.
Wow.
That 30% figure still holds. It's still indicative of all those negative or increased negative results. So it's not good. It's not healthy.
It's true.
But today, in 2023, the Black family, if it was in crisis in 1964, where's it now? 79% of Black families are headed by single parents. 79%.
Wow.
You want to know why there are more 18 to 35-year-old Black men in prison as opposed to college? You want to know why that is? Because there were no male figures in their home.
Oh, wow.
There were no male figures in their home to help them. The Black grandmother and the Black church were the saving graces for Black families in the 60s and 70s. They were able to fill that gap quasi-effectively, didn't quite make up for it. But the problem we have now is that grandmothers used to be 55, 65, 70 years old, retired or near retirement age, had an income, wise in the ways of the world, respected and loved, had decades of that kind of confidence and trust with their grandchildren. That's not happening now. Now you have grandmothers who are in their 30s and their 40s, and they don't have the chutzpah that the earlier Black grandmother had. They don't have that life experience. And so they aren't that line of defense that they used to be because they're still working their careers. They're still raising their children.
Yeah.
So you don't have that.
Families, right? I mean, that's
Right.
just families,
Right.
but I know all nationalities, I'm sure, have their challenges with single parents.
They all do.
I will tell you, that was a challenging unit for us, for me, somewhat challenging, just a little bit, because I really don't like, and I'll just be honest with you, and you can be honest back. I don't like, it feels like stigma to me a lot of times. And maybe that's pride in me, but I'm saying just because there's not a father in my home, that doesn't mean my child is going to be delinquent. It doesn't mean my grass is not going
Correct.
to be taken care of. It doesn't mean there are stigmas though. And they see, yeah, I might
Correct.
mow my lawn a little less than
No,
some,
you're correct. But here's the
but
other.
there feels like a stigma when that
No,
stuff.
no, no.
And
It's
I
the real
get it. So
thing.
I want to know what you think or what you would say when we talk about fatherlessness. My mind is wide open to hearing. What is it about, not about the fatherlessness? I mean, I did study a lot of it, but I'm just still curious. Why isn't it as good for the mom to be taking care of those things too? I mean, I do feel like I'm stretched to every limit that I have in being mom and dad,
Right.
husband and wife. I do feel that. And I do think that there are more challenges. I do see it. I'm a witness. That's challenging for children to not have the father in the home. But why is that? That's what I want to know. Why can't the wife or the mom be just as influential in those areas?
I think it has a lot to do with accountability from a child's perspective. And let me just say this. My dad, when he married my mother, he had a job and a career that basically he was a bank examiner. And so he was gone Monday through Friday. And so he would come back, he would be gone. It would be like, we knew dad was coming home on the weekends, right? We knew he'd be there. We knew Friday was date night. And then Saturday, we'd do something together as a family. And he'd always very good about spending time with us. And he wouldn't go to church with us on Sunday, and so there was always knowing that at some point I'm going to mind mom. I'm going to do well with mom because dad's going to be there. And so there's this extra accountability, and she would use it. She'd say, when your dad gets home, we're like, oh no, don't tell dad.
Yeah.
Have this extra layer of accountability.
Teamwork.
But really the disciplinarian in my family was really my mother by and large. And let me make a very good point. My mother was not failing as a single mother when she met my dad.
Yeah.
She was holding it together.
Yes.
Now, keep in mind, she didn't have the daughter, and let's assume she never met my dad. It was just my brother and I. At some point, as a latchkey child, I know knowing me and not having outside influence would be a problem. We had a church community, though, that filled in a lot of those gaps. I had youth leaders and scout leaders that filled in a lot of those gaps. And so that's how single mothers can do it. And that's why I mentioned the Black church. That's why I mentioned the Black church, because the Black church was there, knowing that the dads, based on, years of abuse and socioeconomic circumstances, and which many started to be changed with the Great Society in 1964. The other problem we created as a government is we incentivized dads not being in the home for women on welfare, which was the biggest mistake we've ever made. We thought we were doing these families a favor. All we did was encourage.
Okay, you can leave. I'll get money from this.
Right. You can't live here. If you do. And so dad's gone so they can get the check. And the check's going to help them get education. And women took advantage of that. I'm not saying that all women took a negative outcome because of welfare. It's a helping hand for a lot of people. But for an entire generation, we basically said, if the father is in the home, you don't get the check from the government until you get on your feet. And sometimes people learn that working poor, I'm doing worse than if I was getting welfare because of all the other benefits that come in. And so you have to really get to the point where you're making enough money to say, I don't need it. But the struggle doesn't go away. It's real, right? It's real. You don't qualify for the things you would have qualified. You don't get WIC, kid doesn't qualify Head Start, may not even qualify for free lunches, but there's a lot of programs that still help working poor, and that's important. I think those safety nets are, whether you're conservative or liberal, I think there's a reason to have those. What would Jesus do? I don't think Jesus would turn away a hungry person. But I think there's some accountability for that. That's why I think we need to be having that conversation, even for people who aren't Christian. I mean, Jesus certainly taught a lot of good things. So I guess I don't want to stress it. And the other point I want to make is in 1964, it was 30% of the Black family in crisis. Families in crisis at 30% single parenthood. All families in the United States, regardless of ethnicity or race today, 30%. As an entire nation, we are at 30%. The Black family's doing worse because they started off in a hole in 1964. So over 60 years, it hasn't gotten better. We need to do better about getting If fathers aren't going to be there, you don't marry a person to be the father of your children. You marry a person because you're willing to commit to them, right? You marry them because you do love them. You have those feelings. You are attracted. You want that emotional and physical connection with somebody, right? And you want to be faithful to someone. You're going to be faithful to them. All those things have to be there for the marriage to work from both folks, right? And so I always tell people, don't, if in 15 years of looking for someone, you don't find someone, you thought, well, maybe my bar is too high. Maybe my standard, maybe I'm asking and looking for too much. Maybe what I'm looking for is not out there. I tell people, don't be so quick to surrender that, right? Be prayerful, because God wants you to find someone too. And they're there. They're there. I'm not a believer. I love my wife. I'll kick my coverage. I don't deserve her most of the time I'm with her. But I will tell you this. I'm also a believer, if I had not found her because of life choices I made, that I would have found somebody that I could be compatible with, that I could have commitment with, that I could have emotional connection to. I absolutely believe that. I'm not necessarily, and I could be wrong on this. Maybe she pegged me out in the great council in heaven, and we were destined, right? Intertwined. And that's that. Let me just say that romantic love notion I just described, that is not a conservative ideal.
Right.
Romantic love comes from liberals. Thank goodness for my liberal friends who introduced romantic love and, forever and a day. They were talking about eternal love before, they even knew about that could be a real thing. So there's a lot of things we can get from each other. We just have got to be willing to build on common ground. We've got to be able to do that. So when I say that, I mean, and again, I could very well could have been raised without a father. The irony is my mother's gone and my father's still with me. And I have that connection with him. And it's a wonderful thing. But now he's reaching the age where I'm starting to worry about him, and I'm becoming kind of a parental figure. And that's what happens when you age. Used to be that, retirement was your children, right? They were the ones that are going to take care of you when you got older. So that's kind of where I'm at. I'm at a spot where I could stop, maybe answer questions, or I could go a little further.
I do have a question, and I'm going to open up to everyone. In fact, you guys, if you want to, you can put your cameras on and your mics on. This is the part where I wanted to have you, you have throughout our call, you have talked about how this applies to us, and how the thing that I am mostly excited about in sharing is just advocacy, inspiring others to take that on. What is it? What do you do as an advocate? And what can we do? I'm not necessarily formally, but even in our neighborhoods. And the thing I can tell you what I've learned, and I want you to add to this, the thing that I've learned is what you can do is understand truth. You need to know truth. You need to know what you believe and why. I'm even being challenged with all of the points that are brought up. In many ways, I'm challenged with, why do you believe the way that you believe? Many of my answers are just because it's what I've always felt. It's because it's what God wants. And then someone would say, why does God want that? Or why do so just knowing what's in your heart, knowing what is truth first, and understanding truth, and then understanding why you feel it yourself, and then being able to stand up for that and advocate for it, advocate for truth, advocate for what is right. But anyway, those are the kind of things that I would love to talk about as what can we do as advocates, or what would you say to us to encourage us to be advocates? I don't know what question to ask really with that, but that's what I was hoping to get.
And here's what I tell people: you have to be present. 9/10 of advocacy is being present. And being present can be having an online connection. Being present could be an email relationship or connection. Being present could be physically there. Being present could be sending dollars to help those in need. But it's about having a voice and being present. That's what an advocate is. But it also is about educating yourself, understanding the issues, and what the best approach is. Most of us have finite resources, that includes our time that we have. And I think we find ourselves in advocacy situations naturally on things that matter to us. So if you're a teacher, then education is going to be something that you advocate, right? For or against. If you're in a certain profession or are of a certain cultural or religious group, then those ideals and values become important to you. The abortion, there's a pro-abortion and there's an anti-abortion group, right? And then how do you advocate? If you're pro-life, how do you advocate for that? Well, you try to get stakeholders to recognize that something needs to be done. And with the recent decision by the United States Supreme Court, abortion is now left up to the states. It's the state legislatures to decide what those abortion laws and parameters are going to be. As really and fairly is how it should have been always. It was new precedent and cutting edge when Roe v. Wade was initially decided, but now it's really up to the states. And what that does basically do, it gets people, local people, to have a voice. Vote. If you want to advocate, vote. And sometimes vote means just being there and being present. You know, you're not casting an official vote at a school board meeting, but you're there. You're getting up, they give you 2 minutes. I've been at several school board meetings where I got 2 minutes.
Wow.
I use them. I'll talk about it. I'll get up there, I'll make my statement.
That's the thing, you're prepared to know what to say. That's the thing. I think do your homework.
Right, do your homework, but don't worry that you're going to say the wrong thing. You say, so what's the issue? Okay, the issue is, right, someone, a canine dog coming to check for drugs in my student's locker. Okay, what's the issue? What's the rule? Well, presently, you're allowed to do that. The school's allowing that to happen. What's the problem? They don't have locks on their lockers. How do we know whose stuff it is? Right? Are urine tests and blood tests next? You know, is this a slippery slope? Right? I mean, and so you have those things. And then, so what do you want the governing board to do about it? So you got to be able to tell the school board, the city council, whoever it might be, what you're willing to do. And do I have time for a brief local story? All right, let me tell you this. I have 2 special needs daughters. Right, I have one who has Kabuki syndrome. We didn't get her. I mean, she spent the first 2 weeks of her life in a NICU. She had multiple surgeries. She was told she'd never walk. She's walking. She was told she'd never talk. She didn't have a roof over her mouth. She lost a kidney soon after birth. She had heart defects, all kinds of things happening. We thought we'd have to have all kinds of heart surgeries. We ended up not having a single heart surgery. She walks, not the straightest, kind of like a drunken sailor, but she gets the job done. She had severe scoliosis. The curvature of her spine is right at the growth plate. And she's right at about a 43% radial. And they don't try to do back surgery, corrective surgery, unless you're 45. So we haven't done that. But if we straighten out her spine, she'd be 5'2". Without it straightened out, she's 4'7". So she's a shorty. But one of the things we did is I advocated with kids with special needs. And so she's joined special needs soccer. I become a coach and a participant in the Special Olympics. And so because my kids are involved, I'm involved. And I think that's, for parents, that is a great way to be present, right? And to advocate.
Your personal needs from your own family. That is a lot of times what is driving. The driving motivation is what is your family need?
Correct. Or what you want to go into. If you want to go into nursing, then healthcare suddenly becomes something important to you. And there's a whole, especially under COVID, we learned so many things that were wrong about what we were doing. And hopefully we learn good things to correct. So if it happens again, we'll do better. We'll be better. So we had a YMCA, a great organization. I'm not knocking the YMCA, but I won't tell you the neighborhood because then you'll know which YMCA. But the schools got together, the city got together, the YMCA got together, and they made this great big YMCA, brand new Olympic-sized pool. They had an indoor slide. They had a lazy river, a whole fun thing for the community. And the deal was all 3 high schools in this city would all have their swim teams there in the professional Olympic lanes with lots of stands and all kinds of things happening. And my youngest has autism, severe autism. And so she was in a class, unfortunately, special education. They just warehouse them in Oklahoma, which is why we moved back to Arizona, because she can go to a special school. And although it's private and it costs thousands of dollars every year, at least it's something that's available to her and it's helping her. But in any event, we got to a situation where the kids once a week would be able to go to the YMCA and go swimming. They had an hour. They didn't let them use the new YMCA that was 5 minutes from their middle school. They sent them across town to the old YMCA, took them 35 minutes to drive over there by the bus, 10 minutes to unload, 10 minutes to change. It gave them less than 10 minutes in the water before they had to head back within the time frame that they had. This was going on for 3 weeks. I was a member at this YMCA, this brand new one. Couldn't understand why this was happening. So I took a day off of work, went in, was working out, getting all sweaty, watching the entire time frame that the kids that we're going over to the old YMCA miles away, and there was nobody using the pool. And so I immediately went to the director's house or office downstairs, all sweaty and breathing heavy. I'm sure you can't, maybe you can tell I'm a big man. And so there I am walking in as a big guy, 6 foot plus, 280 pounds. And I'm like, hey, we got to talk. Oh, okay. What are we going to talk about? So my daughter is at this middle school 5 minutes away. And when I called and asked, and I don't know if it was you or somebody else, why they can't use the facility, I was told it's because it's being used by other people. Well, I had a friend here yesterday, Monday, not used by anybody. I was here Tuesday, not being used by anybody. So I need to know who's making that decision that school can't come over and get the benefit of 35, 40 minutes of swim time in a time when it's not being used by anybody else. Well, it's kind of and he started the runaround. I said, let me be very clear to you. I'm a trial attorney. I'm very good at what I do. I'm going to go to the city council. I'm going to go to every newspaper, and I'm going to go to the school board, and I'm going to point this out to them. We can do this the easy way, or we can do this the hard way. I need somebody to call that principal over in that middle school and tell them the next time those kids go swimming, they can come here at this time frame because there is no conflict. And if there is, it needs to be moved and changed. There's plenty of room for these kids.
Yeah.
I thank you for your time. I left. That afternoon, I got a phone call. I also said, please send me the number to your legal counsel for the school district. I need to know who I need to send the lawsuit to. I got a call that afternoon.
We don't want to lie.
Yeah. From the middle school principal.
Powerful.
You won't believe what just happened, Mr. Petermann. I go, I think I do. That's how you do things.
Stop. Yeah, it's true. Who you know, right? What you know and who you know. That might help.
Right. But again, being present, you get to meet people.
Yes,
and you find like-minded people that come from different. I mean, it helps. It helps. Every little bit helps.
Yes.
Be afraid to have a voice, but it's also important to just stick to the lane, right? Don't get personal with people. If they get ugly with you, just be matter of fact and direct. And as threatening as I may have sounded there, I was using very polite language. I just said, I just need to know who your legal counsel is.
You were in the right. That's the other point.
That helps.
You're in arguments and you're not basing it on something that is just or right, then you have less of.
And I did my research. I did my research.
Yeah. Good stuff. That's good. So this class is very, very inspiring. So, and I have shared a couple of things with the group of things that I've learned, a couple of videos and stuff that are shareable that just encourage people to open up your eyes and see what's going on and see how we can help our kids and protect our kids and all of that, the things that you feel passionate about, and to do it in love. That's the thing I'm taking away from it mostly, is that when you are teaching the truth, I mean, even in something that's so sensitive, you can still stand with the truth. And if they get offended by how you say it, they'll get offended. But
it's to be offended, right?
Just doing it in love and just saying, I didn't say that. I know I've seen interviews where people get so heated, and the person that's calm, Dr. Peterson does that, doesn't he? Jordan Peterson is really good at that. Anyway,
he does a good job. He creates a lot of, but he has a voice and he's present. He's not afraid to get out there.
People confront him and he says, I didn't say that. That's not what I said. This is what I said. Right. And he's just very matter. Anyway, I just love that kind of advocacy. So I don't know if anyone is on here who wants to ask you any questions about advocacy or anything about your story, but you guys are welcome to turn on your cameras. And if you like, if it makes you feel better, I actually can turn off the recording. And then let me do that. I'll turn off the recording so that you guys can feel good about